blowers as being a communication technology for the telepathic communication of the once Sumerian gods to the Homo sapiens sapien. And that is what was translated into the so-called royal bloodlines of the scepter and the ball. Did either the first interview in 2008 in the abandoned parking lot, or when you finally get to talk with the colonel, these men give you a timeline in which the progenitors left Mars and arrived at Earth? What time in Earth's timeline did the progenitors start creating grays, various standing up primates, and so forth?
The colonel gave me the timeline. So my understanding, well, the information that I received from the colonel is that this progenitor group left the Sirius system for our own, okay?
Right.
This is a long time ago. And they arrived, let me make sure I'm telling you this correctly, and I'm not editing. 1 million years ago, they arrived to our solar system. For 100,000 years, they lived on Mars. Mars, there was this cataclysmic event that affected Mars. I believe it was asteroids. It affected the atmosphere. So 900,000 years later, they came to Earth. And during that entire time, they struggled to survive on Earth. And about 250,000 years ago, the progenitors themselves actually died away. And it was their descendants who the colonel referred to as the Ostra albus, which are essentially the descendants of these Anunnaki progenitors, began to thrive on Earth. They also created the Greys at that point, referred to as the Igigi, or the Aloha Greys, the Aloha. Now, they were created as a subcaste, which was, they shared no genetic DNA, they had no genetic makeup with the progenitors. All of the genetic factors in creating the Greys was sourced through alien genetic materials, and it wasn't until much later that the Greys used Earth-based genetic materials to continue propagating. 250,000 years ago, it coincided with, many things culminated at the 250,000 year mark, which was the Greys began to essentially manage humans, the progenitors died off, the Ostra albus remained, and humans were genetically modified to begin servicing both the Greys and these Anunnaki offspring.
Were defined as what physically?
They were the first Anunnaki human hybrid. That was something they never wanted to do. The progenitors, when they began modifying their own genetic makeup so that subsequent generations would be able to survive on Earth, they never intended to interbreed with humans. They never intended to borrow DNA from humans. It wasn't until much later, when subsequent generations of Anunnaki continued to die off, that they realized they needed to incorporate a human genetic component in their own genome and their own genetic structure so that they could survive. And those alien human hybrids, those are the descendants of the Anunnaki. Those are the Ostra albus.
What do they look like?
They look just like you and me. Where they differ is they carry a genetic component that clearly shows their alien origin. And they are very, very controlling about their bloodlines. They have very strict protocols about how they propagate.
Would that fit in with the whole concept of royal bloodlines?
Absolutely. Royal bloodlines and extremely wealthy bloodlines.
Do they have any specific physical characteristics?
None that I'm aware of, because my understanding is that they have successfully propagated around the planet, and there's no specific physical trait that sets them apart from humans. There are Chinese, there are Latin Americans, there are Europeans that belong to this tightly controlled bloodline. It is a genetic component and it's not necessarily limited to one specific group.
Why in your book are they referenced in relationship to the interview with the colonel as being, quote, light bringers or Illumina?
I think that has to do with the fact that over time, these groups have emerged, these secret societies have emerged, and one of them being the Illuminati, and the groups essentially refer to some of the symbolism behind the origins that ultimately culminated into the names that they use for their groups.
Are they tall blondes?
I believe so. My understanding, Linda, is that there are multiple bloodlines.
Why the Astra Albus have had tightly controlled bloodlines of their alien origin stretching back for at least 250,000 years?
Well, for one practical purpose. Once they refined the hybridization process, they had to be very careful as to not disturb that process so they didn't cause anomalies that would result in the same patterns that were seen with their predecessors.
The ones that got sick and died away.
Correct.
And what was the heart of their disease?
It had to do with the atmosphere, Earth's atmosphere. Earth's atmosphere was not conducive to their genetic makeup.
Any other specific medical problem?
Yes. There was unexpected changes in the Earth's environment, mostly greater levels of radiation from the sun that began to corrupt their DNA. So essentially their salvation would come through splicing their own genes with humans to produce a new species capable of successfully interbreeding. The Astra albus essentially created many generations of humans before finally achieving the one that they would accept and be able to breed with naturally. That is the modern human. That is one of the reasons why they created us initially.
If the Astra albus produced genetically both the grays and the evolving standing up primates from Homo erectus up to Cro-Magnon, Homo sapiens sapien, to do work for them, to serve them in some capacity on the earth, why is it that the gray made by the Astra albus would end up cooperating with Homo sapiens sapien that the grays were supposed to manage?
25,000 years ago, the Anunnaki put the Greys on the other side of the planet in the hopes that they would die off. In fact, they infected them with a disease that was designed to kill them and die in the hopes that they would die off. The progenitors warned their offspring that the Greys could eventually become a threat to them. And they did at one point. According to the Colonel and the archaeological tablets that were discovered in Dulce, at one point, humans were worshiping the Greys, the Igigi. And the Anunnaki descendants saw this, they put a stop to it, and they tricked the Greys essentially into putting them on the other side of the planet, which is modern-day Dulce.
So, I'm still learning, so I'm a student with you. This, and we need the big screens and that I could use pointers, but I'll try to, no. So where did the progenitors come from? They came from Sirius AB. What did the Dogon tribe in Africa shock the African missionary people or the professors that went there with all of their detailed knowledge about the astronomical interactions of Sirius A and B that we knew nothing about in the 1800s? And you all, you know what I'm talking about. I'm assuming now you guys have read the Sirius Mystery and that you are familiar with the fact that in the 1800s, this was shocking information. It was buried in a French scientific journal, and ultimately, 15 years ago, the Sirius Mystery was published. What is the author's name again? Who? Templeton, that's right. Temple, Robert Temple. Yeah, and it is a very important book. If you have not read The Sirius Mystery, it is, in funny, strange way, it is the first bead in this story, meaning that it would explain why a very small tribe, the Dogon tribe in Africa, for the last hundreds of years would have had detailed astronomical information about Sirius A and B that our astronomers had no knowledge about until we got into the 20th century. So now, this Air Force Lieutenant Colonel is establishing that Sirius A and B is the source of progenitors, that's his word, that traveled to Mars in this solar system 1 million years ago. I realize that as I say these words, I sound like I'm describing a script from Star Trek. But it's my understanding from long ago when I was working on the HBO project, I was told that Gene Roddenberry was taken into some of the MJ-12 confidences and that Star Trek was put together absolutely on purpose with backing from people working in MJ-12 on the extraterrestrial challenge so that the general world audience would be exposed to all of these bizarre concepts through a TV program where it would all be safe and entertaining. So follow through with me and try to go into a non-fiction mode in your mind that we are now talking about the true history of the solar system and the planet.
Are the progenitors Anunnaki?
Here, I'm going to try to go down the list as I understand it so far. And remember, this is August 11th. I hope by the last week in August, I will be able to do this much, much more and more coherently. My understanding is that the Syrians, 1 million years ago, go to Mars. The colonel calls them progenitors. They live on Mars and probably are the ones responsible for Cydonia and the face that NASA and company have tried to convince us is a sandhill of light and shadow, that it actually was the representation of something, that was a complex, that there are all kinds of complexes on Mars, and that the progenitors lived there for 100,000 years, and then there was an asteroid impact that destroyed much, but they were able to get some kind of an exodus to the next planet over that had a lot of water, and that was Earth. But when they got here, they had a tremendous amount of problems with the atmosphere and the gravity of Earth, and that this led to, because they were obviously capable of doing genetic hybridization, that they began mixing and matching genes on this planet, trying to find a way to survive their own deterioration and extinction. And that they made grays that they called Elohah, very close to Elohim, and they ended up later on making a series of standing up primates from already evolving primates that ended up being us, and that they made a group, when they made the grays, they made Astro Albus, which may be, that's the question. What is the Astro Albus? They are described as being white. The Astro Albus was the closest to the original Sirius AB progenitors. It was their way of trying to build something that would extend their life into it, and then the progenitors went extinct. The Astro Albus is what survived and was what became, with the Greys, the creators of the Sumerian gods in what we call Mesopotamia. That, I think, are the rapid cycle cloned beings with the large nose, the vertical pupils, the ropey headdress, carrying the rod that is drawn in the meeting in 1964 on Earth at Holloman Air Force Base. I think these are one and the same. The Astro Albus would have the ability to also do this rapid cycle cloning and extend whatever its need for human form, or we'll call it the archeloid form, so that they could sustain life on Earth. In human literature, the closest in history we get back to joining up